There is a question I want you to sit with for a moment, and I want your honest answer. Have you noticed that your body has changed shape in a specific way over the past several years? Not just generally, but in the hips and the posterior, where what was once rounded and supported has gradually become flatter, less defined, and in some cases, almost concave at the sides? And have you responded to that change the way most active adults do, by doing more squats, more bridges, more of the exercises you have always been told will fix it, only to find that the shape is not returning regardless of the effort you put in? I am Dr. James Mitchell, and what I am about to explain is the clinical reason why that frustrating pattern occurs, and why the solution is not more repetitions of the same movements. It is something that almost no one addresses in conversations about gluteal loss after 50, and it has nothing to do with effort or commitment. It has to do with the structural foundation upon which every glute exercise you perform is either succeeding or failing before it even begins. Let me explain the physiology. Your gluteal complex, which includes the gluteus maximus, responsible for the overall mass of the posterior, and the gluteus medius, the muscle that provides the rounded fullness at the side of the hip, cannot activate effectively if the pelvis from which they originate is not in a neutral and centered position. The pelvis is not simply a structural frame, it is the neurological command center through which your brain communicates with your lower body musculature. When it is positioned correctly, the neural signals that recruit the glutes travel efficiently and the muscles respond. When the pelvis is tilted anteriorly, shifted laterally, or rotated even subtly, which happens with remarkable consistency in adults over 50 due to decades of prolonged sitting and progressive core disengagement, that neural communication is disrupted. The glutes do not receive a clear recruitment signal, and other muscles, primarily the lumbar extensors and the hip flexors, compensate by taking over the work that the glutes should be performing. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy documented this directly. In adults with anterior pelvic tilt or lateral pelvic asymmetry, both of which are common presentations after 50, gluteal muscle activation was measurably and significantly reduced even during exercises specifically designed to target the glutes. The American Council on Exercise has further emphasized that muscles can only strengthen effectively when the joints they act upon are in optimal alignment. Outside of that alignment, the body defaults to compensation patterns that train the wrong muscles while reinforcing the structural problem that created the weakness in the first place. This is the clinical explanation for why a person can walk daily, perform bridges, and include squats in their routine and still observe a flat and diminishing posterior. The glutes are not being reached, not because the person is not trying, because the foundation from which those muscles must operate has been compromised, and no amount of repetition corrects a recruitment problem that originates in alignment. Today I am going to give you two specific movements. The first is not a strength exercise, it is a pelvic retraining drill designed to restore neutral pelvic alignment and re-establish the neuromuscular pathway between your brain and your gluteal muscles, particularly the gluteus medius, before any strength work begins. The second is a compound movement that, once the foundation of the first exercise has been laid, directly targets the gluteus medius and the broader posterior chain in a way that standard squats and bridges, performed on a misaligned pelvis, cannot replicate. The first movement is the wall hinge with lateral shift. Before I describe how to perform it, I want to be precise about what it is accomplishing at a neurological level, because understanding this will help you perform it with the intention it requires. When you have been sitting for extended periods across many years, the hip flexors shorten and develop a chronic resting tension that pulls the anterior pelvis downward and forward. This anterior tilt changes the resting length of the gluteal fibers and their angle of pull relative to the femur, which is one of the primary reasons they stop recruiting efficiently during movement. At the same time, lateral pelvic asymmetry, where one hip habitually sits higher or further forward than the other, creates an uneven demand across the two sides of the posterior, which is why many adults notice that one side appears flatter or less developed than the other despite performing bilateral exercises. The wall hinge with lateral shift addresses both of these problems simultaneously. The hip hinge position reduces the anterior pull of the hip flexors, allowing the pelvis to approach a more neutral position. The lateral shifting component then systematically loads each side of the posterior alternately, reestablishing the neuromuscular connection to the gluteus medius on both sides independently, before asking them to work together. A 2021 study in physical therapy and sport found that low-load closed-chain pelvic repositioning drills of this type improved gluteal symmetry and recruitment patterns in older adults after just 2 weeks of consistent practice. Here is how to perform it. Stand approximately 6 to 8 inches in front of a wall with your back to it, feet shoulder-width apart, toes turned very slightly inward to open the posterior hip. Your knees should be soft, not locked. Place both hands gently on the hips. Initiate a hip hinge by pushing your hips backward until they make light contact with the wall behind you. Your torso will lean slightly forward during this movement, but your spine must remain long and neutral throughout. Do not round the lower back. Once you are in that hinged position with your hips resting lightly against the wall, shift your hips slowly to the left. You should feel the right gluteus begin to engage as it responds to the altered load distribution. Hold that shifted position for 1 to 2 seconds, then return to center. Now shift to the right and feel the left gluteus engage. Return to center, then slowly return to standing. That complete sequence is 1 repetition. Perform 8 to 10 repetitions with deliberate, controlled speed. Rest briefly and complete 2 sets total. The coaching detail that matters most here is the quality of the lateral shift. This is not a twisting of the torso or a dropping of one hip. It is a pure lateral translation of the pelvis, keeping the spine centered and the weight distributed evenly through both feet. Think of sliding the pelvis from side to side over a stable base rather than tilting it. If balance is a consideration, place your fingertips lightly on a countertop or the back of a sturdy chair positioned in front of you. The support does not reduce the effectiveness of the drill. It allows you to focus your attention on the pelvic movement rather than on maintaining balance. This movement may feel deceptively minor. I want to prepare you for that perception because the neurological work it is performing is not minor at all. It is resetting the spatial relationship between your pelvis and your glutes, re-establishing the motor pathway that years of sitting and postural compensation have degraded. When your glutes begin to respond to this drill, you will feel a warmth and engagement in the lateral hip that standard bridge exercises likely have not been producing, which is the clinical indicator that the gluteus medius is being recruited. The second movement is the wall-facing squat with calf raise. With the pelvic alignment partially restored and the gluteus medius beginning to receive clearer neural recruitment signals, we now introduce a compound movement that simultaneously builds strength in the posterior chain, challenges the balance system, and reinforces the upright postural alignment the first exercise established. Here is the biomechanical rationale for performing this squat facing the wall rather than in the conventional orientation. When you squat facing a wall with your hands placed lightly on it for support, the wall physically prevents the forward trunk lean that most adults default to during a squat, particularly as the quadriceps fatigue and the body attempts to compensate by shifting load forward. This forward lean transfers the mechanical demand away from the gluteus medius and onto the quadriceps and hip flexors, which are already overactive in most adults with the postural profile we have been discussing. By eliminating that forward compensation, the wall-facing squat keeps the load where it belongs, in the posterior chain, and specifically challenges the gluteus medius through the range of hip abduction and external rotation that the squat position naturally creates when the knees are cued to track outward. The addition of a calf raise at the bottom of the squat serves 2 clinical purposes. It recruits the gastrocnemius and soleus under load in a position of hip and knee flexion, which improves the functional strength of the posterior lower chain as a coordinated unit rather than training the glutes and calves in isolation. It also dramatically increases the proprioceptive and balance demand of the movement, because elevating the heels while maintaining a squat position requires the deep stabilizing muscles of the ankle, the knee, and the hip to coordinate simultaneously. A 2022 study in the Journal of Aging and Physical Activity confirmed that integrated lower body movements with balance components improve both muscle activation and fall resilience in adults over 60, particularly when performed without external weights. Here is how to perform it. Stand facing a wall, approximately 6 to 8 inches away, feet slightly wider than hip width, toes angled outward by 10 to 15 degrees. Place both hands lightly on the wall at approximately shoulder height. This is for guidance and postural feedback, not for bearing significant weight. Begin to lower into a squat by bending the knees and pushing the hips back and down. As you descend, actively cue your knees to press gently outward rather than allowing them to collapse inward. This outward knee position is what engages the gluteus medius through the squat movement. Lower to the point where your thighs reach approximately a 45 to 60 degree angle from horizontal. Full parallel depth is not the goal. Controlled, aligned depth is. At the bottom of your squat, slowly rise onto the balls of your feet, elevating both heels off the floor simultaneously. Hold that elevated position for 1 to 2 seconds, maintaining the knee outward cue and feeling the engagement in the posterior and lateral hip. Then lower your heels with control and press through your feet to return to standing. Perform 10 to 12 repetitions per set. Rest and complete 2 to 3 sets. The most important coaching instruction for this movement is to resist the instinct to rush the tempo. Every phase of this exercise, the descent, the heel elevation, the hold, and the return, should be performed with the same deliberate control that characterized the first exercise. The neuromuscular reconnection work you did in the wall hinge drill is fragile in the early weeks of practice, and it will be overridden by momentum and compensation if the movement is performed too quickly. Slow tempo is not a modification for those who are weaker. It is the precise condition under which the gluteus medius is most consistently recruited throughout the full range of this movement. I want to close by being direct with you about what this pair of exercises represents, because I think it is worth naming clearly. The progressive flattening of the posterior that so many adults over 50 experience is not simply an aesthetic change. The gluteus medius is a primary stabilizer of the pelvis during walking, stair climbing, and any single-leg stance phase of movement. When it weakens through disuse and misalignment, the pelvis drops on the unsupported side with every step, a pattern called Trendelenburg gait, which places significantly elevated stress on the hip joints, the lumbar spine, and the knee. Rebuilding the gluteus medius is not cosmetic rehabilitation. It is structural rehabilitation with direct implications for pain reduction, fall prevention, and the preservation of independent mobility. What you have here is a 2-step clinical protocol. The first movement restores the alignment that makes effective gluteal recruitment possible. The second movement builds the strength and shape that the aligned position now allows. Neither exercise is complicated, neither requires equipment. What they require is consistency and the understanding that the result you are working toward is not achieved in a single session, but accumulates across weeks of practice as the neuromuscular pathway deepens and the muscle tissue responds. Here is my challenge to you. Practice both of these movements every other day for the next 4 weeks. Keep a simple record of how each session feels. Note when the lateral engagement in the first exercise becomes more perceptible. Note when the squat begins to feel more stable and more posterior driven. And at the 4-week mark, come back to this video and leave a comment. Tell me your age, where you are watching from, and what you noticed. Which side felt weaker initially? When did the movement begin to feel more natural? Your account of that process is valuable not just to me, but to every other person in this community who is at the beginning of this journey and needs to hear from someone who has walked it. If this video has given you something clinically useful today, please share it with someone in your life who is navigating these changes, and subscribe to this channel for weekly medically grounded guidance made specifically for adults over 60. Your glutes have not given up on you. They are waiting to be given the right conditions to work. Start tomorrow. I will see you in the next one.